What's up, everybody? Noah from Stage 3 Motorsports here, and I'm joined by Bill today. And if you already looked at the thumbnail, then you know we got a new 2021 F-150. Now, the purpose of this video, plain and simple, is that we wanted to do a review on this truck, but we wanted to do a better review than just standing out front of the dealership with this thing parked and yelling a bunch of specs at you. And we figured what better way to do it than a huge road trip. Now, part of the reason this came to be is we bought this truck out here in Waco, Texas. We're good friends with the dealership that we picked it up from, and we had to bring it back to Phoenix anyways, because that's where we're gonna build the thing. But since we're doing that over 1,000 miles of road trip time, we figured why not use that as a true review on this truck to see what we think of it, since it's not just a redesigned truck, it's actually an all-new F-150. So Bill, do you want to tell them a little bit about what kind of truck we optioned out here?
Yeah, so this is our 21 F-150 STX in iconic silver. We got the 3.5 EcoBoost, the 10-speed transmission. We're gonna go over some of the interior options later once we start driving. The other big note here is we've got the 355 electronic locking rear end. I'm gonna let Noah tell you about some disclaimers before we get started showing you footage.
We're out here on some private property in Texas right now, and so you're gonna see some areas where we're running this truck off trail and into some grassy plains and just stuff that you wouldn't normally take a truck on if you were on public lands. And we just don't want to give you guys the impression that we're out destroying public property or trying to ruin trails, and we're certainly not trying to hurt the ecosystem here, but there were some areas that the owner said we could pull off into and play around with to kind of test the capabilities of the truck. So just keep that in mind as you're watching. As you can see, we've already had a bit of fun ripping around this truck. It's got like 35 miles on it, which are mostly off-road miles at this point, but we're gonna hop back in, keep ripping around, and get on with the review. What's up, folks? It's the following day, and we initially planned to check in with you guys in the morning, but as you can see, we're already on the road. We've actually knocked out a couple hundred miles, just grabbed lunch at Wendy's, so we're just gonna kind of start into the review from here. And the nice thing is now we have a little bit more experience to talk with instead of just talking right off the bat after spending 10 minutes in the truck. So with that being said, the one thing I do want to cover is talking a little bit about the off-roading, quote-unquote off-roading that we did yesterday, because it was surprisingly good for being a bone stock F-150.
Yeah, we went through a couple areas. With the little Polaris Ranger first, thinking that we would never make it through in the truck. Once we got through those, we just kind of took the challenge and kept pushing it and made it up some washes and some real slick clay stuff that, although it took a couple times, I mean, it did it. It wouldn't have left you stranded. Yeah. There was a few areas where we went into it and just 4 high, and then it would cross the axles and maybe spin for a minute. And then as soon as you backed out, went to 4 low and put the locker on, it would just crawl up wherever you needed. And I don't know how it was making as much traction as it had. It did really, really well. And that's not to say that there isn't still room for improvement. I suspect that if it had been a full night of rain before we went out on that land and it was really mucky, this probably would have got itself bound up and we would have been pulling it out with a tow rope or something. But with it still being a little slimy, it got through it just fine. And I think that off-road performance only is an indicator of how much better it can be once we're able to modify the truck a bit and get, you know, a little leveling kit on there, a better tire and some stuff like that. Yeah, some clearance was definitely needed. We hit that bottom splitter, bent back the little wing that they've got on the side skirt there. Just basic things that you could fix with a little bit of clearance.
For sure, yeah. Busting up those plastics is almost unavoidable with a truck that sits this low to the ground, and then also scooping up mud with the tow hooks and everything else. So definitely some modification needed there to make it a true off-road rig. But with that out of the way, we're not going to make this much of an off-road review because obviously we didn't test it that hard, but we just wanted to point out that it did a lot better than we thought. So I think the first thing we really want to tackle is talking about interior, because it's completely redesigned. This is an all-new interior over the previous generation, and it's the first time we've really been able to lay hands on it. We haven't even actually touched one of these trucks at a lot until now.
Yeah, my first impression when I got in is you'll see the dash is big and flat. It feels more spacious than the past ones. We think some of that could be that we have a column shifter and we don't have the floor shifter, so you get some of that open area down there.
Yeah, it's the fold down seat with that gap in the middle, so there's a lot of open space that we usually don't have because we almost always have a console shifter.
Yes.
After spending some time in the cab, I'm really liking the look of the way they've reshaped everything. The new steering wheel layout, the new vents, the way that the screen is integrated. We've still got physical dials and buttons, which is great. I love that not all of the climate control stuff has been pushed into the screen. There's still a lot of tactile buttons and things are in a pretty logical location where it's easy to get to. So we haven't been having to fight with a lot of things or look for buttons that we need for certain features. It's all pretty intuitive. And on a truck that's an STX like this, obviously we don't have a ton of upgrades stacked in here. This isn't a platinum truck, but with everything it's got, it still feels well optioned and comfortable.
You could also spend some time counting the finishes in here. It looks really good, but you've got kind of a brushed aluminum look, and you've got what looks like a fabric at first. It's just some plastic, some nice hints of like a chrome, some gnarled plastics.
Yeah, there's this metallic gray trim bar that goes all the way across the front of the dash too. And it actually sounds like it's too much and like Ford maybe overdid it with the different materials, but they blend really, really well. And once again, in a base model truck, it's impressive that it looks this nice and that they put the time in to do that many different finishes, because you typically anticipate that it's just all going to be plastic. So I think it really matured the inside of the truck and it looks updated. It doesn't feel like Ford took a step backwards here. And like you said, it's still familiar to somebody who's grown up driving F-150s all the time. As far as the seats are concerned, these are pretty comfortable. I have no complaints. It's got a little dial for the lumbar support over here. I think that the bolstering and everything is nice. It could maybe do with slightly more bolstering. It's a little flat on the sides, but that's to be expected in a truck of this grade. Overall, I think most people will be really happy with how comfortable it is, and the materials on the seats aren't bad either. They added this new gray, almost denim-like material that's kind of down where your thighs would sit on the bottom of the seats and in some of the accents. It's really pretty nice looking, actually. It's different from what I've seen Ford do in the past, and I think it works well here.
Yeah, it's got some kind of pleating to it, gives it some texture, keeps you from sliding a little bit. We definitely like that. It's got the big flip down center console. I was disappointed that this doesn't flip up, so we don't get any kind of storage in here. So it feels a little bit like a waste of space here. It's really comfortable. I think I actually like it more than some of the leather trimmed trucks and where you get that stitching there or whatever. So I really liked having this here.
Yeah, the lack of storage is a little annoying, and I've also noticed that we've got some big cups in these cup holders, and it holds them well, but on the driver's side, that cup can kind of be in the way of where you set your arm, and also they put a pad there shaped for a phone, but it's on the passenger side.
Yeah, it's the first time I used it actually since you messaged it, and I really like it, and they've got a little cutout for the charger to go there.
Yeah, it's funny because it is directly shaped for a smartphone. Yeah, like that's its exact purpose, yeah. In terms of backseat comfort, you can see that obviously the seats back there are the same material. We've got Leo, our camera guy, sitting back there, and a couple bags with a bunch of gear and everything too for the trip. But there's a lot of room. These Super Cruise definitely have plenty of space, and you don't feel cramped even as an adult sitting back there. Plus, the seats are still pretty comfortable. You do have chargers and things in the console on the backside, so there's definitely enough amenities that it doesn't feel completely barren, and you're not just eating your knees sitting crunched up behind the driver or the passenger. Ford definitely made some improvements in this interior design in terms of storage that's just built in as well. One of the first big things we noticed is the new upper compartment in the glove box. It has a little push button. It's pretty deep. There's definitely some good space in there. And the nice thing is, if your manuals and your other essentials are in the lower glove box, this is just more extra room that doesn't have to be filled with essential things that you keep in the truck. So good for road trips or whatever else, or even a little bit of camping gear or anything that you have with you. They also have a massive tray on top of the dash now. I like that that got way bigger and way more practical.
Yeah,
we
we've
now have
thrown
like hats and glasses and masks and everything piled up on this.
Yeah, I just keep adding to it and it keeps holding everything I throw up there.
Yeah, really, really nice there.
The other tray to mention is the bottom one. Because we don't have that floor shifter, we've got an open tray down there. You can keep your road trip candy down there so it doesn't melt up in the sun. So transitioning from storage to cup holders, we also have what we seem to think are larger trays at the bottom of the doors than we have in the past F-150s. So we've got like a huge water bottle down there. They do have a designed cup holder down there, but there's just some really big pockets that run all the way along the side of the door on both sides.
Yeah, these big cups seem to fit in almost all of them as well. There's a lot of room to squeeze stuff in, which is nice, because I know in some of these vehicles in the past, they give you enough room for a cheap plastic little tiny water bottle, and that's about it. But nobody just carries cheap water bottles with them. So this feels a lot more accommodating, and there's a lot of cup holders available. Obviously, there's the two right here in this armrest. We've got technically 2 in each door panel up front. They sort of split it out to give you another smaller one in the back. And then behind us, there's a little drop-down console on the floor that has 2 cup holders in it, as well as more in the doors. So you've got space for drinks all over this thing.
Have you felt like annoyed by auto start and stop or any of that kind of stuff?
In this truck, it's been way less annoying than some of the other trucks. Yeah.
I wondered because you were in and out of the vehicle quite a bit yesterday.
Yeah, so it's interesting you mentioned that. As we were driving around, auto stop start is normally really annoying, and I almost always just immediately hit the button. With this truck, it's not even like a new powertrain or necessarily that different. Like, it's still just an EcoBoost with a 10-speed, and it's really, really quiet, like they almost all are. But it's even less noticeable in this, just in terms of vibration and everything. There was a few times it would tick off on the light, shut down, and I wouldn't even be able to tell until I hit the gas or let off the brake or whatever. So if you're really paying attention to it, you know it's there, but I do feel like it's gotten better. I still can't say I'm sold on it. One of the big things we always talk about being in Phoenix, being in the heat of the desert, is that auto stop start tends to shut off your air conditioning, and that is a huge issue when it's 115 outside.
Or it pulls it back. It'll pull your fan speed to like a 1 or a 2, and when you've just taken off and hitting the first stoplight, that just isn't an option. So
yeah, still not completely sold on it, but it's certainly better here than it has been in the past. So they're improving the technology somewhat.
Yeah, I didn't notice it getting in and shutting it off immediately like I had been trained to do in the past.
Yeah. So let's move on to talking a little bit about the tech in this truck. One of the first things that I really like about Fords, pretty much all Fords in general now, is these sync systems, and obviously they're up to Sync 4 now. In this truck, it's fantastic. Even with this being the smaller screen, I have no issues with it. I love that it has CarPlay. As somebody who uses an iPhone, I think it works excellent. And just in general, I think Sync is one of the better infotainment systems out there, just amongst other competitors. I know some folks really like the bigger Tesla-style screens or like what the new Rams have going on, but for me, as someone who likes the connectivity of something like CarPlay, but still likes physical buttons on climate control and everything else, this is a really good blend for that.
Yeah, it's nice that you get to use the touchscreen and all that if you want to use that, but you don't have to for most of the controls.
Yeah, it doesn't fight with you too much. It definitely doesn't feel very convoluted. It's a pretty easy system to get used to if you haven't driven Fords with Sync before and you're new to it in this vehicle. So I typically can't say enough good things about that. I think it works really, really well. The only hiccups we've ever heard of in the past are sometimes there's been some issues with Android connectivity to this, and we've also seen people having problems on some of the other F-150s where the screen will go black when they're driving, or when they start the truck it won't kick on and they have to reset it. So we did do a video about that on resetting on the older trucks. Actually, we haven't tested it on this one. I'm sure it's probably the same thing, but you can do a soft reset. It doesn't seem like it's wildly common or it's a huge issue where you have to take it to the dealer, but that stuff has popped up, so it's worth mentioning as fair review of this system.
So a couple notes on safety as the only parent in the vehicle right now. They have a new system, and some of the other vehicles out there have had them for some time. I've driven with them before. I've always found them very annoying, but I get it. If you are in driver reverse and you open your door, this will put you in park right away, and it will actually move the column shifter all the way back up to park. Whether you're off-road or backing a trailer, whatever that is, like at times I've done it. I completely understand why it exists, but I find it annoying. The other thing that's interesting is Ford is starting to add the back seat sensor. So when you shut it off, if it feels weight in the back seat, it's going to remind you that you have a child and that you should get them out of the vehicle. Again, a little bit silly if you are forgetting how to be a parent or whatever that is. Where we find it annoying is that we have gear back here.
Or our cameraman who thinks is a child and wants us to remember.
So we always remember Leo, but if Leo's not back there, we still get the alarm because we have camera gear sitting on the seat and it sees the weight.
It probably goes without saying, but once again, because this truck isn't necessarily top of the line in features, there are a few other tech things that we're missing. We do have regular cruise control, and it does have lane sensing where it'll vibrate the wheel a little bit if it feels you drifting, but nothing really crazy in terms of self-driving tech or anything like that here. Okay guys, it's the following day. We spent the night in El Paso and we are back on the road heading back to AZ. And the truck right now as it stands has a little over 850 miles on it so far. So we've definitely had some time in the saddle and been able to kind of think through it a little bit more. And we're gonna move into talking about the exterior design and kind of what Ford did with the general look of the truck. One point of confusion here that I've heard some people say who weren't paying super close attention to the new F-150 is that they thought that this was maybe just a refresh of this previous generation and that the truck wasn't actually a redesign or a new vehicle, but it is all new. None of the body panels are reused. It is completely different. It's still all aluminum like you'd expect from F-150. I personally really like the new redesign on these trucks. I think they're very classy looking. It's still a very simple design. Ford definitely didn't reinvent the wheel here, and there's not a lot of crazy vents and pieces of chrome and things stuck on all over the place. The front end is very familiar in a lot of ways, but I think they did a good job of updating it and making it feel like a modern 2021 vehicle without going over the top. And it is the kind of design that I think will probably age really nicely too. I don't see these trucks getting outdated extremely quickly, but I know a lot of people are upset that Ford didn't push the envelope a little bit more and didn't make the truck more different from the previous generation. It's hard to say whether that's really truly a good or a bad thing, because obviously design is just kind of how you interpret it. But like I said, I actually really like it.
So one of my favorite things is the grille. I love that they've gone to a gloss black. There are a bunch of different grills for this one, but on our STX, I really like that. It took me a minute, but I do like the hood. It reminded me a little bit of a Chevy at first, and you can tell once you start to look at the angles on the hood, it's very different than the previous model, but it's growing on me and I do really like it.
Yeah, there's definitely some more noticeable changes once you get up close to the truck and really look at it. Obviously, the headlight design is new. They've kind of tied the headlights and the fog lights together, which on our truck, with it being the just standard halogen reflector lights, it's not as crazy. But with the trucks that are LED, that have either the accent bar or upgraded over the version that we have, you can see that the light design kind of ties together with the headlight and the fog. Obviously, like Bill said, there's a lot of new grille designs. I think there's 11 different variations now. I don't know why Ford felt like there needed to be that many, but they do look good. The hood design is really angular. They kind of tweaked the fenders a little bit. I think the back with the bed and the tail lights and the tailgate design is actually a little bit more simplistic now too. It looks pretty decent. The lights are not anything to write home about on this truck with them not being LED. It looks like a regular reflector tail light, but it's definitely still fits the design of the truck overall.
Yeah, when you see the LED strip on the nicer package trucks, it starts to give you that Super Duty like C-bar kind of look to it. I will say that the tail light has that open chrome area, and I mentioned kind of joking around that it reminds me a little bit of a Nissan from the side. So I could definitely see the smoked tail light kind of look being popular on this. I would rather just see a mostly red, housing.
Another thing that we actually were talking about yesterday when the cameras were off too is the side mirrors on this truck are very different from the previous generation. And I think the side mirrors actually look really nice from the outside. They're a little bit chunkier now, and it definitely seems like Ford was aiming for some sort of aerodynamic change there to help with fuel economy. But the actual mirror side of it that you look at from inside the cab is a little bit odd. It feels like there's less surface area and not as much visibility there, but you do get the little blind spot mirrors on both sides, so that's a benefit. But I think I do prefer the previous generation mirrors just for usability.
I do too. I think from the outside, I mentioned I think they look a little bit like a large SUV mirror, and the way they're hinged I think is a little bit odd. I don't like that a whole lot. And they look like ET's head from inside.
That too. I think exterior-wise, what I'm really looking forward to most with this truck is just seeing what it'll look like modified, even with a little bit of a leveling kit on there and a different wheel and tire. This one actually has 20s on it right now, and it's kind of it's a fine-looking wheel. I don't know. It's okay for a factory wheel, but it doesn't thrill me. I've never been a big fan of wheels that big anyways. I'd really like to see this with a 17 on it and a more aggressive tire. And I think certainly helping the rake will do a lot for the look too. This truck noses down really hard. It looks like it's always on the brakes almost. It's just like a wedge coming down the road. So some of that stuff will improve the look quite a bit too, and F-150s typically modify pretty nicely. So I think we've said enough about exterior to get people fired up about whether they really hate this truck or love this truck, so that'll be interesting to read in the comments. But let's talk a bit about the powertrain setup here. What does this truck have?
The 3.5 standard output twin turbo V6.
And of course, that's mated to the 10-speed automatic transmission, because that's what Ford is putting in everything these days. But that's also not a bad thing. I think from my experience so far, it drives excellent. This isn't the first time we've had a truck with a 3.5 and a 10-speed on it, but in this new redesigned F-150, it's still a very nice package. The truck is extremely fast, and it's hard to tell when it's changing gears. It kind of just is always in the power band because it jumps through them so quickly, and it never feels like you're at a loss for power, especially without any mods on this thing. is lightning quick.
Yeah, you mentioned yesterday we were pulling a slight grade, 85, 87 miles an hour, and it stayed in 10th. Didn't even drop.
Yeah, didn't even change gears. And it's really nice to have the power to overtake people, especially on a long road trip like this, where you come up on some semis or, a truck pulling a trailer, something running kind of slow, and you can grab that extra 20 miles an hour real quick, get around them, drop back in, and it's no fuss, and you don't have to really plan ahead too much. Now, obviously, the 3.5 EcoBoost is not the only engine option for these trucks. That's just the one that we chose, but a lot of Ford's former engine options are still here for this year. So the 3-liter diesel, the naturally aspirated V6, which I think is a 3.3. There's also, of course, the 5-liter V8 and the 2.7 EcoBoost. So there's a couple other options out there with different power levels, and some of those will vary depending on the package of truck that you get. A real sore spot for people with this new generation, though, has been the changes that Ford made to the 5.0. So with it being a V8, Ford is making some adjustments to try and keep it in the lineup while still hitting the fuel economy ratings that they need across the board. And one of the biggest changes was that cylinder deactivation. Now, instead of it running as a full 8-cylinder motor all the time, it will tick down to a 4-cylinder motor to try and conserve gas. And they're not the first company to do this, and certainly not the first to implement this technology. It's been around a long time previously, and Chevy has experimented with this quite a bit, but it always raises some concerns about reliability, and it just feels like more stuff to go wrong, especially if you bought a V8 for a V8. You really don't want a motor that's just going to tick back to be a 4-cylinder. So I get people's concerns there, although I will say I'm glad that Ford is at least trying to implement technology to keep a V8 in these trucks and hasn't completely given up on it.
Yeah, so our 18 blue 5.0 had the 10-speed paired to it, and we joked that thing was a race truck. That was incredible. So
yeah,
it's still a really good option, and I would hate to see the V8 go away.
For sure. Well, and even with the giveaway truck that we just did, that 2020 was also a 5.0 at the 10-speed, and it's a really nice setup. It's not as quick as the EcoBoost. As much as people hate to hear that, the EcoBoost is certainly faster and feels more powerful, but the V8 is a lot of times quite a bit more fun, and the 10-speed brings out the best of it. So it's still a really good package for these trucks, and I think even with the cylinder deactivation, a lot of guys are probably still going to opt for it in the F-150, but it'll be a point of contention, I'm sure, for most.
Yeah, and off-road, I think we both probably like the 5.0 better. It's just easier to control. I mean, you can see that when you were in some of that muddy stuff, on that property, and that, you had a really hard time controlling wheel speed just because you can barely back off it enough. These turbos come in, and it just wants to throw mud everywhere.
It does, and the throttle response is a little bit touchy in this truck, so it's really hard not to get your toe on it and have it want to just kick in and start making boost. So it's good when you need the power instantly, but not always ideal, especially off-road, like Bill said. Lots of wheel spin can be a big problem. And certainly if you're on rockier terrain, you don't want wheels spinning and then catching and snapping axles. That's a classic off-road problem. And the 5.0 has always felt like it's a lot better at being manageable in those situations where you can get the torque when you need it, but you can kind of control how easy that power band comes in.
Let's talk a little bit about our fuel mileage so people can tell us that we did something wrong or whatever.
Yeah.
So we're averaging 15.1 right now. That was from driving it off the showroom floor. That includes the off-roading that we did and kind of spinning around in the mud and messing around there. A lot of in-town driving for the first day or so in Waco. And then it's just continued to climb since we've been out here on the highway.
Yeah, absolutely. Which, from what I've seen, Ford rates this motor and transmission combination to be able to do, I think, 18 miles per gallon city and then 20-something miles per gallon highway. So it fits pretty closely with what Ford's ratings are for the truck.
Yeah, and we've done nothing to try to get mileage out of this. We haven't really cared about what speed we were running. We've been, getting on it on on-ramps just to see how quick it is. So I'm sure that you could get much better mileage if you gave it any effort at all. So since I finally got some seat time, let's talk a little bit about drivability, suspension, comfort, all that.
This truck is stock, so it's very soft, and I think soft to a fault at some points. As much as I really like how comfortable it is on the road, certainly around town, it's no hassles. This truck does not break your back by any means. It's really, really comfortable. But on the highway doing 75 or 80, when you hit those kind of dips in the road and just gradual changes in elevation, it'll bounce over it, and then it rolls like a Cadillac sometimes. Like, it feels like the nose just won't settle. I don't know if that's a shock issue or the way it's sprung, but it does get a little bit wallowy, and It certainly won't be a deal breaker for most people, but it does feel like Ford could have maybe stiffened the suspension up just a touch to make you feel a little bit more confident at higher speeds.
It's almost the opposite of the previous generation, in that the previous generation, the front was pretty good, and the bed just wouldn't stop moving, and that's why everyone upgraded the rear shocks on that. I don't feel that as much here, so maybe they did stiffen up the rear shock a little bit, and maybe that's putting some more, movement in the front. But even lane changes, I feel like if I wanted to do one quick, it would kind of have the body roll just at this kind of speed.
Another area where that soft suspension ride can be an issue is off-road, because one of the things that happens is you're trying to slow the truck down or you're coming over certain obstacles, it's going to want to bounce around, and it makes it more difficult to modulate your braking and keep it under control because the weight of the vehicle is fighting you on it.
Well, and right now you've got that low clearance issue, and we saw that, and then you put the brakes on off-road, and you're scraping the ground with that front chin, so you're going to rip it off.
Yeah, it certainly doesn't help it. Well, we're getting pretty close to being back home. We've probably got another hour and a half on the road or so figured now is as good a time as any to circle back around and mention some of the stuff that we either missed earlier or said that we would wait to find out. So, Bill, what do you got for us?
So on the safety front, it does have both sides have the child seat locks for the car seats. We did figure out that the little compartment here, the upper glove box, fits some large fries from McDonald's and a Big Mac perfectly. It's like McDonald's designed it. We played around a little bit with the traction control, and so this has the kind of dual purpose button, and that you hit it once and you turn traction control off, and then you hold it down for 5 seconds and you turn advanced track off. What I thought was interesting is that on the previous year's truck, traction control off felt like it did almost nothing. Still felt like it limited wheel spin and everything else. So the 09 to 14 trucks, it would really let you rip. 15 plus trucks, it was like it wouldn't even accept that input.
Yeah, our blue 5.0 would just fight when I tried to get it to do donuts and stuff.
Yep, same with our red 15 Eco. It was like it wouldn't even allow it. And this is kind of back to that 09 to 14. So I touched it once, took traction control off, was able to just rip it around in some loose gravel, and then put advanced track off, and it felt exactly the same. Didn't see it, and I was only in 2-wheel, so it'd be interesting to see what it did in 4, but I like that we are back to that functionality and where I can shut it off. In the 09 to 14 trucks, I mean, you could get 70-mile-an-hour wheel spin on like a wet road or whatever. It didn't care one bit.
Yeah.
I'd prefer that.
Another weird little thing we've noticed with the interior, just being in this truck for so many hours, is that with the flip-down visors, there's a huge mirror on the passenger one, but there's no cover on the mirror or any lights. So if you have the visor down, you just have to stare at yourself or stare at your legs as it reflects back, which is a little odd.
They are huge, which is kind of great.
Yeah, the visors are massive though, and they do fold sideways and slide back, so there is good window coverage, and that's really the most important part.
Yeah.
We've had a lot of good things to say about this truck, and definitely a couple smaller gripes on some other stuff like the mirrors, as I mentioned. But overall, what do you think would be just one thing that you would change on this truck after spending this much time in it?
I'm going to give you 2.
Even better.
Yes. The mirrors, definitely like the biggest one. And the other one, I think, just to do with the package of the truck, is that we don't have the dual climate control. That has,
true.
We've kind of been fighting over that for however many miles, and with you're in a sweatshirt and the sun's coming in over there, and I wish we had that.
Yeah.
So, what about you?
For me, it's honestly hard to pick out things that I don't like, because I have been really impressed with this truck, and like I said early on, I think the interior redesign was huge, but I definitely still prefer trucks that have the option with the center console and a shifter mounted there as opposed to the column shifter. That's one of those things that I just, even after 1,100 miles now, I still haven't got used to really moving the shifter. It just feels like it's fighting me, and I really like having the storage of that center console. In my experience, I never need to have the middle seat. I know depending on the type of person you are and how many people are in your family and how often you're hauling people, sometimes this is crucial, and there's guys in our company that would only option an F-150 this way with the seat in the center, but just in the way I use a pickup truck, it's not that important to me.
That's actually my favorite configuration, is the column shift Super Duties with the 2 huge cup holders and all the extra storage for your phone and everything else you throw in there. I like that a lot.
Yeah, it is
big
pretty
storage
handy.
back here.
The coolest part of that is the pull-over cup holder thing, where you can fit the fat drinks on this side, and then you can use it as a regular little bucket when you need it.
That'd be a really nice option. So same kind of question, is there anything you saw initially when we ordered the truck or when we got it at the dealership that you've been impressed by, you didn't think you were going to like?
As weird as it sounds, I don't think that there's been any huge surprises for me, and I don't mean that in a negative way, but I actually had pretty high expectations for this truck. Even though it's not a wild redesign, I was really looking forward to the new interior and to just kind of seeing it in person and feeling the dimensions of the vehicle. And I figured I would like the powertrain as well because it hasn't changed too much from previous generations. And honestly, the truck has met and exceeded expectations for me. I think it's been excellent on this trip. And I'd hate to make it sound like a Ford advertisement or something where it's like, oh, they must have shelled out this vehicle for you so you could tell everyone how great it is. Like, A, I think Ford probably would have optioned out a nicer one for us if they were trying to do that. But B, it's not something we were given. I mean, we did buy this truck, and it just so happens that it really has been a super pleasant experience. I think that this is up there in one of the best vehicles that I've road tripped in a long time. It's comfortable, it's quiet, it like has all the power that you need. I still think even with some of the options that I didn't necessarily love, I think it's still very accommodating. But to throw it back to you, was there any surprises on your end?
Mine would be the seats. You know, a lot of times a base cloth seat is hard, especially seeing some of the new pleating they put in there. I've just been really surprised. I felt like it was broke in from the moment I sat in it. And, you know, at 16, 17 hours of drive time that we're going to have over 2 days, they're extremely comfortable. I've just been really impressed by those. So speaking of us paying for this vehicle, with the STX being kind of a base model, but then we had some nice upgrades with the electronic locking diff and the EcoBoost 3.5. We ended up with tax title license right in the 44.5 range, somewhere in there, 45,000, which I think is a pretty good value. We said this is very comparable to the 18.50 we had that was optioned about the same, and that was in the same kind of range, 44, 45,000. So I feel like it's a great value for a good, strong truck. You can certainly spend more or less, but this gets you a lot of the options you're going to need to do some off-roading and road tripping and everything else.
Absolutely. And I think earlier when we were talking the trip too, we also kind of threw it out there that at the price that these trucks run now, some of the stuff we're saying as a praise should also sort of be expected with how expensive they've gotten, you know? We
were joking about like, oh, that's pretty nice. You get a nice screen for an STX package. That's nice. And I'm like, well, it was $45,000.
Yeah.
They should give us a nice screen.
Exactly. But yeah, overall, pretty good value in this truck nonetheless. So sure enough, we made it all the way back to Phoenix. We're here parked out front of the shop. So at this point, just a matter of unloading our gear and getting out of here. But hopefully you guys found this review helpful or at least interesting and maybe give you some insight if you're looking into picking up one of these trucks for yourself. Now, it's worth saying that this truck is going to be sticking around with us for a little bit. We do have some plans in the future, but the biggest of those plans is that this thing is getting built as a giveaway truck. So if you missed out on our 2020 giveaway F-150, now you've got a chance to win something even newer, and this truck should be just as cool. So make sure you stay tuned for that and follow along with this build as we get it going. And as always, thank you guys for watching.